Hi, everyone. Happy holidays. And let me take a sip of water. How are y'all doing? We're a lot earlier than usual, and that is because we are going to do a 12 days of Christmas, aka a 12 days of live streams, which we had some votes as to whether or not our little mini series should be called, Lord, now I'm like, what did I write down? Lawsuits, liabilities, and live streams, or scams, scandals, and streams. And it looked like most people voted for option B, scams, scandals, and streams. So that's what we're going to do. But we're going to start off with a bit of a serious topic, which I guess it will fall under scandal, which is the Brittney Griner prisoner swap, and particularly the legalities around that, and how I think it's very convenient that people are forgetting that America itself is the largest dealer in the entire world. So we're going to discuss that. So it'll be a little bit actually of Colonizer Exposed coming into our live streams, and we're going to kick off scams, scandals, and streams. All right. So if you have any suggested topics, you let me know, and we're going to do that. So I'll be seeing y'all for the next almost 12 days. It's not exactly 12 days, but close enough. Close enough. All right. So let's go ahead and get into it. So we are going to first talk about Brittney's ordeal and release, as well as the legalities around prisoner swaps and what constitutes the United States as someone wrongfully detained. Also, because we are going to be talking about war and about arms and about weaponry. This might get demonetized. If it gets demonetized, I'm just going to put it on Patreon. So hopefully it doesn't. We will see. We will see. Then we are going to go into a little bit the bleak history of prison swaps. Prisoner swaps to be specific, and then a little bit about Viktor Bout, which I realized I spelled his name in the English way. It's Victor with a K, so sorry about that. And the US have something, a big something in common, so we're going to spend the majority on that, discussing the Ministry of War. Yes. All right. Which is the original name of the Department of Defense. They changed it to Department of Defense because the Ministry of War sounds very imperialistic, which it is. All right. Let's get into it. So Brittney's release. Hey, everyone. Can y'all hear me, by the way? I usually do like a check if y'all can hear me, and I forgot to do it. So hopefully y'all can hear me. No one's saying anything. All right. All right, perfect. So let's talk about Brittney's release. If you're unfamiliar, this is Brittney Griner and her wife. I know this was a huge ordeal for their family. Unfortunately, last February, almost 10 months ago, she was detained in Russia for having a very small vape cartridge, which contained hashish oil, cannabis oil, and she was detained. She was then tried and convicted in a Russian courtroom and sentenced to a penal colony, to hard labor, to which people seem very unaware or very flippant about the idea of someone being sentenced to hard labor, which is telling about the society we currently live in. So I think it's important, before we get into the specifics about her case, why she was in Russia in the first place, which when this story first came out, her fellow teammates in the WNBA, Brittney Griner is one of the most famous and noted WNBA players today, is because the WNBA doesn't particularly have pay equity, and they don't pay her enough money to support her wife and her children and to have a family in the United States. So let me make this a little bit bigger. Let me make me small. The average NBA base salary for the men's this season is about $5.4 million, compared with about $120,600 for the WNBA. The WNBA season is a bit shorter, mostly because advertisers are unwilling to run the majority of their spots for the WNBA. So therefore, they have shorter games, 36 versus 82. However, if you were to do the math on that, which let me move myself, the average annual base salaries mean an NBA player makes 44 times what the average WNBA player makes. So due to that large pay disparity, a lot of women in the WNBA do play overseas. And Brittney Griner, who again is the most famous WNBA player, is playing overseas because we have pay issues in this place. Important to note that in the first place. So as she was detained, one of the things that came up and why people started, you can't say any curse words in the first 8 minutes of videos now, or it automatically get demonetized. So let me not say that word. And why people start complaining is because they believed that she shouldn't have been swapped for who she was swapped with, which is preposterous. And we'll get into that in a second. Before we get into that, I wanted to get into the actual laws that allow for, in my opinion, this very demoralizing, inhumane process, which is swapping human bodies. And governing bodies just saying, you know what, fine, we will just argue with each other and we will use humans as collateral. Highly problematic to begin with. All right, so in the United States, we have this act, which is most commonly known as the Robert Levinson Hostage Recovery and Hostage Taking Accountability Act. Under this act, this is when our Secretary of State basically, they set various meetings with the Department of State to assess whether or not you have been wrongfully detained in a foreign country. And that is demarcated by a set of about 10-ish different qualifications. So we won't read through all of them. I'm going to go through the one that I think mostly applies to Brittney, but we'll read through a couple of them. So essentially, the Secretary of State shall review the cases of the United States nationals detained abroad to determine if there is credible information that they are being detained unlawfully or wrongfully based on criteria which may include whether the United States officials receive or possess credible information indicating innocence of the detained individual. So of course, that one seems like a no-brainer. If you're innocent, you are being wrongfully detained. Let's go through some other ones. The individual is being detained in violation of the laws of the detaining country. The detention appears to be because the individual sought to obtain, exercise, defend, or promote freedom of the press, freedom of religion, or the right to peacefully assemble. And then specifically, which is number 10, which I would say 9 and 10 mostly apply to Brittney. Let me make it a little bigger because I know y'all can't see that because I can't see it. 9, the individual is being detained in inhumane conditions. A penal colony is very inhumane. There also exists various penal colonies throughout the South, particularly in Louisiana and Alabama. 10, due process of law, which I would say this mostly applies to Brittney's case. Due process of law has been sufficiently impaired so as to render the detention arbitrary. All right, so you don't have to hit all of the things. You just have to hit one of them to then qualify as someone who is wrongfully detained. All right, now, it should be noted because people seem to have forgotten what happened when she was first detained at the airport. She did state that she accidentally packed the vape cartridge. It is I believe less than 3 ounces, very small. We are not going to argue about, because I've said this a million times on this channel, we are not going to argue about the fact that laws are not inherently moral. People think overwhelmingly that laws inherently are moral and that if it's a law, there's morality tied to it. No. Slavery was legal in this country for hundreds of years. It is highly immoral. Laws sometimes are arbitrary. Laws can protect you. Laws can force specific morality on people or perceived morality. Laws are not inherently immoral or moral to begin with. I'm not going to tell people whether or not you having a small amount of something that is legal in the country you came from, whether or not the country you're in should go and process you in this manner. That is a relevant argument. The relevant argument, however, is according to the United States law, you are unlawfully detained if you don't receive due process of the law. Due process is if you go to a different country and they say, Stephanie, you know what? We do not wear sparkles over here. You cannot be running around with sparkles. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. Like, what's the defenses to that? Like, I should have looked that up. Okay, I apologize. And you tell this to me in a language that I do not speak. You don't explain to me in the language that I understand. Due process is likely violated. Due process is the ability that you are to receive a fair trial. You are to understand what you are accused of. It is to be explained to you in the language that you understand what is going on. And that you receive some sort of adequate assistance in the United States from a lawyer, in other countries from a legal representative. So to note, to go back to this ordeal, and this is from PBS when this first happened, Brittney Griner was provided a bare minimum interpreter, to which he said she did not understand any of the proceedings. They were all conducted in Russian, and that the interpreter barely helped her and didn't explain anything to her. If this happened in the United States, it would be a violation of due process of the law. If you do not understand something that's going on, you will automatically get an appeal in the United States if you do not speak English, which is why court reporters, court interpreters are always there to avoid that. So after hours of proceedings, she did not understand. She was allowed to hand over her personal belongings to a lawyer before being led away in handcuffs. Griner said she received only a cursory translation of the allegations during February 19th hearing, where a court sanctioned her arrest. So no one explained anything to her. And I think one of the more egregious factors that she did not receive due process of the law in Russia is the fact that she received no explanation nor an access to a lawyer, but was instructed to sign documents in Russian. Brittney Griner does not speak Russian. She does not read Russian. If someone has arrested you and you're in a foreign country, you don't understand anything they're saying, and they're telling you just sign this and then maybe you could go home. Who knows what they told her? Also, probably levels of coercion could be implied there. Similar things happening in the United States, but we're not going to get into that right now. All right. So this is from the Independent from UK. So another source saying Brittney Griner says she was forced to sign papers in Russian without proper translation, simply told you are guilty. Now, again, the law in Russia is you cannot have this minuscule amount of hashish oil of, can I say, I don't know if you can say that, of cannabis. We'll use the scientific term of cannabis. However, I'm sure without looking up Russian laws, there are likely defenses to that. For you to know the defenses to saying like, oh yes, this is an accident, or maybe this is under the amount that I'm allowed to have, or this or that, you'd have to be able to understand Russian. Or have a lawyer say, nope, you know what, my client qualifies under this medical exception, my client qualifies under this, my client qualifies under that, if there are those defenses. That would only be allowed and be open to her if she had proper process of the law, which the United States qualified Brittney Griner as somebody who was unlawfully detained. So the U.S. agrees, and I'm of the agreement that she didn't have proper process of the law. So again, arguing about whether or not people should be running around with small, minuscule amounts of cannabis is irrelevant. It's irrelevant to the actual, I would say, the reason why Biden and his team sought to bring her back. All right, so there is that first act that we discussed, and then there's also this executive order, which this is recently around, I think it's July 19th. Charlie, you'll have to lean in. I can't see. The executive order on bolstering efforts to bring hostages and wrongfully detained United States nationals home. So it's important to remember throughout this whole thing that people on the internet are arguing because, access to information, I guess, is not the same. I know it's not the same with everybody. So sometimes people just say things. But, before we say things, we could learn some other things. They are classifying Brittney Griner as someone wrongfully detained under the laws of the United States. That is her classification. All right, which is why I think important to know, if you read any article about her case, and it is a US-based article, it still says, even though she was convicted in Russian court, that she allegedly had this small, minuscule amount of cannabis. Y'all know, I cannot see that. Okay, so this is just a little excerpt from the executive order that Biden put out the other day. So specifically, any malicious actors, governments, organizations that take hostage for financial, political, or other gain, as well as foreign states that engage in the practice of wrongful detention, including for political leverage, which Brittney Griner was most definitely used for political leverage, to seek concessions from the United States, threaten the integrity of the international political system and the safety of the United States nationals and other persons abroad. I therefore determine that hostage taking and the wrongful detention of the United States nationals abroad constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States. I hereby declare a national emergency to deal with this threat. So that is a premise under which Brittney Griner was brought home. Okay, so just put that out there. Which brings us to the interesting conversations I've been seeing people have on the internet, because people are up in arms that how dare Brittney Griner, this woman that worked. Hey, Lena. Or Lana, let me know which one. This woman that is a basketball player for the WNBA, how dare she be swapped like a piece of chattel for someone who was an arms dealer? Someone who's the proverbial boogeyman who Hollywood made a movie about and did all these awful things. Should be stated at the beginning of this analysis that yes, Viktor Bout is an awful person. Yes. The villain, one of the villains, the little villain. Because if we were to look at the bigger villain, I think it's very interesting that people seem to be turning a blind eye as to who is actually selling these weaponry. I'm trying to figure out what word I'm allowed to say. We're going to see. This is going to be interesting to see what the algorithm thinks of this topic. So there is currently a war going on between Russia and Ukraine, in which Russia is deciding to be a colonial power and invade parts of Ukraine. In that, the United States has stepped in and said they will aid Ukraine, which has been very interesting to see play out, particularly with what happens to the weapons that the U.S. uses U.S. taxpayer money to give Ukraine. And the answer is, if you poke around the Department of Defense website, CNN, NBC, PBS, anywhere, the answer is, I don't really know. And specifically, that is from defense officials. So the quote, I couldn't tell you where they are in Ukraine, they being the weaponry, and whether the Ukrainians are using them at this point, a senior defense official told reporters last week. They're not telling us every round of ammunition they're firing at who and when. We may never know exactly to what degree they're using the switchblades. Switchblades are these high-powered weaponry. The Department of Defense doesn't earmark the weapons it sends for particular units, according to the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby. This grows into a huge issue because the U.S. has done this numerous times, and every single time it does not end well. Now, let me make me smaller. Another congressional source said the U.S. military views the information it's receiving from Ukraine as generally reliable because the U.S. has trained and equipped the Ukrainian military for 8 years now, developing strong relationships, but that doesn't mean there aren't some blind spots, the source said, such as issues like the operational status of these specific weaponry that I have no idea what any of this is, to be quite frank. Now, the interesting part of this is, so according to Jordan Cohen, a defense and foreign policy analyst at the Cato Institute who focuses on arms sales, said the biggest danger surrounding the flood of weapons being funneled into Ukraine is what happens to them when the war ends or transitions into some kind of protracted stalemate. Such a risk is part of any consideration to send weapons overseas. For decades, and this is important, the U.S. sent arms into Afghanistan, first to arm the Mujahideen in their fight against the Soviet army, then to arm Afghan forces in their fight against the Taliban. And then the Taliban used some of those arms. Yes. The U.S. doesn't learn its lesson ever. Here's every weapon the U.S. has supplied to Ukraine with the $13 billion, which we're going to go through this list really quickly. It's important to know the U.S. sends over, and has done this many times, large amounts of weaponry into conflicts that they themselves sometimes start, which we'll get into in 1 second, all in the hopes of arming the person that they want to win, regardless of morals. Patrice Lumumba, which we'll talk about in 2 minutes. Regardless of who actually is the right person, they send these things over, and then they don't earmark any of these things. And then when people like Viktor Bout come into holdings of the ammunition, it's, oh, look at the boogeyman over there, when the largest weapons manufacturers are indeed in the United States. So 1 second, let's leave off of this, and we'll just go through all of the, well, not all of them, but some of the weaponry the U.S. has supplied. This is a list, which I will put this in here. This is a complete list up to the date, which was August 26th, so it's probably not complete today anymore, of the weaponry the United States is sending over. High mobility artillery rocket systems, 1,500 tube-launched optically tracked wired guided TOW missiles, 155 millimeter howitzers. I don't know what these things all sound awful. National Advanced Service to Air Missile Systems. Mind you, this is our taxpayer money, by the way. This is where it's going. Let me make it bigger so y'all can see. I will make me over here. Perfect. Okay. Switchblades, this is what I was talking about before. Switchblade Tactical Unmanned Aerial Systems, which the Switchblades back in Afghanistan, they lost them. They lost them for a few years and then found them back, conveniently. The U.S. has sent over 700 Switchblade drones to Ukraine since March. There are various types. Puma unmanned aerial systems, M17 helicopters, 20 of them to be specific, Harpoon coastal defense systems, the other equipment and small arms, okay, vehicles and boats, unmanned coastal defense vessels, 50 armored medical treatment vehicles, and the list is quite long. War is a money-making business. Okay, let's go back to presentation. Because none of those things were free. Oh, no. Okay. Let's see if it's this one. I think it's this one. Okay, perfect. So, in case you're wondering how much money the Ministry of War makes and how much money these private companies are making, arms sales by world's biggest defense companies rise to almost $600 billion. And this is what's tracked because the arms business seems to lose the arms sometimes. It's likely probably a couple trillion. Oh, okay, there we go. So this is from Forbes. Almost a third of the total sales from the top 100 companies are by the 5 largest companies on the list, all of which are from the US. The main one being, which you're probably most familiar with, is Lockheed Martin. If you live in Florida, you're very familiar with Lockheed Martin. I believe it's either their main headquarters or one of their headquarters is in Orlando. Raytheon Technologies, Boeing. Yes, Boeing also sells arms, not just planes. Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. Between them, they had $192 billion in sales due to this thing that we have in the modern world, which is perpetual warfare. Now, Lockheed Martin, I think, is really interesting because I went to the University of Central Florida, which UCF prides itself on its long-standing relationship between the Department of Engineering and Lockheed Martin. If you are the best, the brightest, you can get an internship at Lockheed Martin. You are set for life. It is the best thing ever. But I don't think they really advertise this part, which is Lockheed Martin has a long history, this is from their website, of successfully providing its customers with missile systems that are affordable. Affordability. Got to make sure you have that. Proven and in production. Our reputation is backed by a record of exceptional contractual performance and successful partnerships in both the U.S. and international defense communities. Other Lockheed Martin systems, just as you see the language they use for this specific product section, other Lockheed Martin systems include air-to-air missiles to give pilots air supremacy. Anytime you hear something supremacy, it's usually not going well. Helicopter launch anti-armor missiles to destroy enemy tanks and other armored vehicles, man-portable short-range anti-armor and assault weapons, kinetic energy, blah, 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 all these things that harm real-life people. But hey, it makes a few people a shit ton of money. And yes, this is from my beloved alma mater on the website, which is Lockheed Boost Your Experience. Lockheed Martin, UCF celebrate 40 years of college work experience program that's helped shape the local workforce. The employer of choice in the Orlando area is Lockheed Martin. Lord. And just in case we haven't fully driven the point home, the increase in 2021 sales marked the 7th consecutive year of rising global arms sales. However, due to supply chains, they've seen a little bit of a minor, I would say, decrease in that, I suppose the powers that be don't have all the funds from our taxpayer money, but they're picking that up. We might have expected even greater growth. To think of growth in the concept of selling weaponry that actually kills real people is disgusting. But growth at all costs, in arms sales in 2021 without persistent supply chain issues. Darn the supply chain, they didn't hit their quota. Both larger and smaller arms companies said that their sales had been affected during the year. But don't worry, it's not affected that much. So the U.S. State Department approves $2 billion in arms sales to 4 other countries because the U.S. is very, by and large, an arms dealer. It's not just Viktor alone running around selling things. Viktor is also not producing things. Yes, he is the villain, but he is not the big villain in this story. So Viktor Bout, and again, I put it in the US way, so it should be a K, so that way at least it's in the Russian way. Viktor Bout, Dick Cheney, and the US have some things in common. And yes, that is Dick Cheney, in case you forgot about Dick Cheney, which one should never forget, the evilness that is Richard Cheney. So on the left is Viktor Bout. On the right is Dick Cheney, our former vice president, the VP under one George Bush. And most notoriously, the VP remembered as being the least liked and worst politician before Trump. And also, actually, and truthfully, his polling numbers are worse than Trump's, which says something. All right, so in case you're not familiar with what Viktor Bout actually did, because again, he is a criminal and he is one of the villains, Bout's big breakthrough, his breakthrough in his arms dealing, came in the days after the 1989 to 91 collapse of the communist bloc, cashing in on a sudden glut of discarded Soviet-era weaponry to fuel a series of fracticado. Okay, I'm gonna practice that one. Civil wars in Africa, Asia, and beyond. A lot of arms dealing and funding of wars is usually in the continent, so in Africa and South America, as well as Southeast Asia. It is a lot of destabilizing of formerly colonized poorer countries. With the Soviet Union's vast air fleet disintegrating, Bout was able to acquire a squadron of about 60 old Soviet military aircraft based out of the UAE, by which he could supply his products around the world. So which is why it's very important that the U.S. keep better track of what the hell they're sending over to Ukraine, or they are essentially creating a new Viktor Bout. Just probably a younger one. The man is in his 50s. Now, this is his specific charges that he was found guilty of, and he was sentenced in the United States. He served a fraction of his 25-year sentence, and 25 years, which I thought was really interesting, was the minimum sentence. So he didn't receive the maximum. So specifically, you have, I will just read like the colloquial terms of what all these laws are: conspiracy to kill U.S. nationals, conspiracy to kill U.S. officials and employees, conspiracy to acquire and use anti-aircraft missiles, conspiracy to provide material support and resources to a foreign terrorist organization. And I find the last one very interesting because the U.S. itself participates in the last one, which is conspiracy to provide materials, support, and resources to foreign terrorist organizations. I feel like probably can't say the T word. Well, we already said it. Okay. Now, because art imitates life, or life imitates art, or whatever the hell the saying is, if you haven't watched Wakanda Forever, one teeny tiny spoiler, I highly recommend watching the movie. I very much enjoyed it. It was sad. However, there's a very interesting scene in the movie, and this will be the only tiny spoiler I say, in which they are sitting in some type of Department of Defense office, and Shuri, I was like, that's not a girl's name. Shuri's favorite colonizer, the CIA agent, is sitting there with his ex-wife, who is the villain, and someone else, and they're having a conversation, and they say, what are we going to do? To which she then says, or I'm not sure if it was the general, then states, let's move towards destabilization. To which I was shocked, to be honest, that Disney was finally going to go there, and that's all they said. A little, sprinkle in the destabilization word, because the U.S. has destabilized many a nation. It is not a secret. A lot of the CIA files are open, and one of, I would say, the worst instances of destabilization occurred in 1961, which was Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. He was executed with the help of U.S. and Belgian forces. And if you haven't watched it, the first Colonizer Exposed video we ever did on Patreon was about the Congo, and specifically how the largest genocide in the entire world took place in the Congo against the Congolese by the Belgian. An estimated almost 20 million Congolese people were murdered through a span of 20 years. And that has largely gone unrecognized throughout the United States and the world. Now, y'all know I cannot see this. Hold on one second. So this is from Zen Education Project, which if you're a teacher, I highly recommend them. They give, what is it called? What is the word? Lesson plans. So they provide lesson plans. Their whole purpose for existing is teaching people's history. So by people, they mean actual people. So they teach a lot of working class history, a lot of Black history, a lot of indigenous history. Highly recommend. And if you're somebody that just loves history, I sign up to their newsletter and attend some of their talks as well. So they had this excerpt about Patrice Lumumba. So on January 17th, 1961, democratically elected Prime Minister of the Republic of Congo, Patrice Lumumba was executed with the assistance of the governments of Belgium and the United States. Both of these governments have admitted this. This is not a conspiracy. This is not, oh, what do you mean? No, that's the fact. In 1960, his 1960 Independence Day speech said in part, "We are going to show the world what the Black man and woman can do when he works in freedom, and we are going to make the Congo the center of the sun's radiance for all of Africa. I'm in the way. We are going to keep watch over the lands of our country so they truly profit for her children." Just 6 months later, he was imprisoned and executed by firing squad. The history of the Congo is very, very heartbreaking and very sad. The Congo is the most, I believe, what are the terms? Most naturally resourced country in the world, and also the most exploited country in the world. And this is another picture of Patrice. This is from The Guardian. This is an article way back in 2011 celebrating the 50th anniversary. Celebrating is probably not the best word. Acknowledging the 50th anniversary of his assassination, and why his assassination was by many viewed to be the most important assassination and the most heartbreaking of the 20th century. And so for that, we'd have to take a step back to the big war that has gone on between the United States and Russia for decades, the Cold War. So this is the excerpt really quick. With the outbreak of the Cold War, it was inevitable that the U.S. and its Western allies would not be prepared. It's very interesting to see how this is written. Not be prepared to, quote unquote, let Africans have effective control over strategic raw materials, lest these fall into the hands of their enemies in the Soviet camp. AKA the U.S., England, France was like, no. We've colonized them all these years. We can't let them have independence. I know, but like independence and they can't do that. They'll be influenced by these other white people, and then they will do bad things because we are, a nanny state, and that's what we're here to do. Colonization and imperialism is the root of so many problems in this goddamn place. All right, let us continue. It is in this regard, let me make this a little bigger so y'all can see. It is in this regard that Patrice Lumumba's determination to achieve genuine independence and to have full control over Congo's resources in order to utilize them to improve the living conditions of our people. This is written by a Congolese writer. Of our people. I done lost where I was, child. Was perceived as a threat to Western interests. It's interesting when you juxtapose the idea that African freedom is a threat to imperialist capitalist interests. It's very interesting. It's very interesting to me. To fight him, the US and Belgium used all the tools and resources at their disposal, including the United Nations Secretariat under Dag Hammarskjöld. I didn't say that right. I'll practice it. And Ralph Brunchi to buy the support of Lumumba's Congolese rivals, and then hired killers. So his assassination is viewed in the Congo still to this day as the original sin of what then sent Congo and Congolese people back. And what has become a stumbling block, in the quotes of the writer, to the ideals of national unity, economic independence, and Pan-African solidarity that Lumumba championed, as well as shattering blow to the hopes of millions of Congolese for freedom and material prosperity. Most of the countries, so Belgium colonized the Congo, and France colonized large swaths of Central Africa and West Africa, France is essentially a nanny state. France is propping itself up, and we've talked about this. France is propping up its economy due to Central Africa. That's the only reason why France is still holding on. All right, now back to everyone's least favorite VP, which is Cheney. Now, it is the year 2004. If you can remember back, you are significantly younger than you are now. Your knees work better. And the big boogeyman and villain to everyone, both independent, Democrat, and Republican alike, is a one Dick Cheney. And not only because he shot his friend in the face during a hunting accident, but because he was very much, and probably still is, viewed as one of the worst people to ever sit in the Oval Office. All right, so a refresher on Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney formerly was a CEO of Halliburton. Halliburton is a defense company. I think it's very interesting in terms of branding that these arms dealers have referred to themselves as defense companies. They literally manufacture weaponry, sell weaponry, see who's allowed to have weaponry. I mean, that's what an arms dealer is, minus the manufacturing. So they are actually the end-to-end of the product life cycle, which is interesting. So Halliburton with the military has grown substantially since Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney took office. Their goal was to crack top 5. They really wanted to compete with Lockheed Martin. The company rose to the 7th largest military contractor in 2003 from the 22nd largest in 2000. That's a big jump. They never did get to Lockheed status, but they got very close. And a one Dick Cheney used to be their CEO. A conflict of interest, most would say. Now, one of the interesting things and one of the reasons why people hated him on both sides was similar to Trump. He was supposed to, when he stepped into office, remove himself from the private sector, to which he stepped down as CEO and kind of removed himself. However, his financial disclosure statements from 2001, 2002, and 2003 show that since becoming vice president-elect, he received nearly $2 billion from the company, specifically $1,997,525. That's such a specific number from Halliburton. $451,398 in a bonus deferred from 1999. How convenient. And the rest is deferred salary. He also holds options to buy Halliburton stock. Now, so it wasn't just that, he did all these things and he was this rich, mega rich man who shoots his friends in the face. And he also wanted to prop up Halliburton. It's that Dick Cheney and George W. Bush but Dick Cheney is very much responsible for the war in Iraq. Very much because war is a business. Very much decided, well, as the former CEO and as somebody who still has stock and who stands to make a lot of money, let's go find weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, which to this day, it is now confirmed they never existed in Iraq. Remembering why Americans loathe Dick Cheney. This is from The Atlantic from 2011. So I have a lot of throwback articles in here because people have let Dick Cheney live out his life in relative peace, and I don't like that. When Vice President Dick Cheney left office, his approval rating stood at a staggeringly low 13%. 13%. As a child, I was in middle school when Dick Cheney was the VP, and my dad has always been very interested in politics, watched a lot of news. And so I remember being like, oh my God, Dick Cheney is evil. Dick Cheney is the worst person ever, because it's easier as a child and honestly for adults to have one proverbial boogeyman. It's easier for people to be like, Viktor Bout is an awful person. Yes, true. And so is the American government. It's hard when you realize the systems in place are so large. It's very frightening. So a lot of people, now that we had a boogeyman to look at, it was Dick Cheney. And it was rightfully earned, to be honest. Just a reminder as to what he did. In order to get the war on Iraq started, Dick Cheney circumvented the Department of Defense and unlawfully, he has never gotten prosecuted for any of this, which I find to be wild, unlawfully had a direct link and a direct chain of command to the Department of Defense as the vice president, to which he received information that he was not supposed to receive, and then decided to go on a press tour stating multiple times that there were WMDs in Iraq. Now, from the article, during the several months preceding the March 2003 invasion of Iraq, and therefore the vice president became aware that no certain evidence existed for WMDs in Iraq, a fact articulated in several official documents, which he read. The man can read. Including a report by the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency concluding that there is no reliable information on whether Iraq is producing and stockpiling chemical weapons or whether Iraq has or will establish a chemical warfare agent production facility. He did not care because, again, the man owned so much stock in Halliburton, he wanted to beat Lockheed Martin. He wanted to get in the top 5. Despite these questions and uncertainties and having full awareness of them, the vice president nevertheless proceeded to misrepresent the facts in his public statements. This is Trump before Trump, claiming that there was no doubt about the existence of chemical and biological weapons in Iraq and that a full-scale nuclear program was known to exist. I remember this in us having to go over this in, I think it was like civics class or history class. I had a teacher that was very much into current events. And so play-by-play of just Dick giving his speech, acting a fool. No evidence. Not a thing. Sending people off, telling people to kiss their sons, daughters, and children goodbye to go fight in something that did not exist. To go bother with people who were minding their business. The amount, and I think it should be noted as well, when we talk about the Iraq War, most people focus on how many Americans, service people were murdered, but the number is still unknown as to actually how many Iraqis were harmed. And that shows the callous nature of war, in that America didn't even bother to look at all these civilians whose lives we have unequivocally ruined. Didn't even bother to count the people. And this is very telling. So this is Georgie the other day, which hopefully it'll let me play this.
The decision of one man.
Hold on, I'm going to rewind it 1 second. I'm going to play it a little faster so that maybe it won't catch me. Because sometimes they be wanting to take your money and I don't really want to give it to them. Okay, let's rewind. Let's rewind, George. Okay, let's play it.
Man. To launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. Of Ukraine. Iraq. Anyway. 70.
Y'all, first of all, is him always doing foolishness and then laughing? He's always doing nonsense. Since day one, George will do nonsense and then laugh like it's funny. And yes, this is real. This was him a couple of months ago where he was like, oh yeah, decision of one man to just invade people. Oh, well, sorry about that. He has no remorse. The fact that him and Dick Cheney are not sitting in prison is very wild. The fact that we, to be quite frank, have allowed him to rebuild his character arc using Michelle Obama and being like, Michelle Obama is my friend. I give her candy. Come on. We have to do better. And because we can't play that and raise all our blood pressures without playing this, which I try to watch this once a year because this is still the funniest thing that has occurred and is hilarious. And there was a way better clip of it, but it wouldn't let me embed it. So we're just going to play this clip. This is George getting a shoe thrown at him, as he should, by an Iraqi journalist who then, years later, then ran for parliament. So everyone should want to throw a shoe at him. The man is highly problematic. Now, on to the last part of this, which is the Ministry of War's budget. The amount of our taxpayer money that goes into terrorizing others. Now, the Pentagon fails its 5th audit in a row. The Pentagon is the only governmental agency. Also, there you're going to hear like a weird noise. It's a heater. The Pentagon is the only government agency that has never passed its audit. Not one time. Stays failing its audit. As in, they ask them, what did you do with all this money you collected from the taxpayers? What things did you buy? And the Pentagon is always like, I mean, we invaded Grenada, which the U.S. did in the 80s. Trifling, tiny little Caribbean Grenada. Yes. We did this. We destabilized so-and-so. We did this, but, we didn't write any of it down. We can't be bothered with that. This is from the Department of Defense comptroller, which comptroller, they have them in every company as well. Like, as somebody who was in-house counsel, you used to have to work with them at the end of the year. They basically are your in-house auditor who's like, okay, where's all the money going? So this is Mike McCord. He said, and quote, "I would not say that we flunked, although his office did note that the Pentagon only managed to account for 39% of its $3.5 trillion in assets." 39%? That's an F. A 39% is an F. Sir, that's an F minus, actually. The process is important for us to do, and it's making us get better. It's not making us get better as fast as we want. This man has jokes. The news came as no surprise to Pentagon watchers. After all, the U.S. military has the distinction of being the only U.S. government agency to have never passed a comprehensive audit. Someone should call the IRS. Someone should really call them. And I thought this was interesting, so I tried to source all of the resources from different places, and then always to check the sources. This is my first time coming across this website, which is Responsible Statecraft, and I had some hesitancies. It was very interesting. The first being, it is a bipartisan think tank. Usually when things are bipartisan, foolishness is occurring. Even when things are Democrat leaning, foolishness is occurring. However, it is truly bipartisan, so I thought that was interesting. Their entire existence is dedicated to auditing the Department of Defense, to saying that the U.S. needs to stop meddling in other people's business, that this is dangerous. And so far, from what I could see, I was like, okay, that's valuable. So their mission, Responsible Statecraft, is the online magazine of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. It publishes outside contributors and reporters, as well as staff and analysis, opinion, and news to promote a positive, nonpartisan vision of U.S. foreign policy and critique the ideologies and interests that have mirrored the United States in counterproductive and endless wars that made the world less secure. So while I don't agree with everything, I agree with the general premise of why they started it, which is we cannot live in a state of perpetual war. There's actual things that happen to real life people. Real life people's lives get upended when you just do drone strikes into villages and are like, well, I don't know them. It's trifling. It's trifling behavior, to say the least. All right. So a little bit more into the Ministry of War's budget. The $773 billion with a B budget request reinforces our commitment to the concept of integrated deterrence. Integrated deterrence sounds a lot like destabilization to me. Okay. Allows us to better sequence and conduct operations around the globe that are aligned to our priorities. The United States has the distinction of being the only country that has military bases in more than 2/3 of the rest of the world. Is giving imperialism, modernizes the joint force, and this last one is just a bold force lie, and delivers meaningful support for our dedicated workforce and their families. While I have many critiques of the Ministry of War and the Department of Defense, I have less critiques of people who actually are regular servicemen and servicewomen and service people, specifically because the Ministry of War targets poor people. If you went to a majority minority, since people love to use that word, school, then the Army sets up a little table, child, during graduation time, like, hey, you kid, college is not for you. Come join the Army. Come see the world. Come maybe die, but that's okay. Don't worry about that. It's often the only way that a lot of people that live in rural areas, particularly Black and brown people, and particularly I would say poor white people that live in flyover states, have the ability to actually get somewhere at the cost of their own life, which is trifling. So the idea that they are working towards using some of this money for the vets is a lie. How many unhoused veterans do we all see every day? The Veterans Affairs, in terms of the hospital, the VA hospitals, they're very underfunded. They're very underfunded. But they only account for 39% of where all the funds go. So maybe that money is lost over there, somewhere. And on that point, no, we've come to the end and we'll have some water time because I'm feeling a little bit sick, so I have water. So let's go through the comments. Okay. I didn't do a good job today of looking at the comments while I was doing this. But that's only because I said it. I said it earlier to where only subscribers could comment. So I was like, okay, we won't get the woo-woos. All right, cool. Hey, Bellamy. Yeah, this is a great point, which is messed up that Brittney didn't receive a proper interpreter, which is messed up because the Russian team she played for has interpreters. Exactly. It's purposeful. It's purposeful, her denial, her being denied due process. All right. Exactly. Biggest arm traffickers on the planet. But yeah, this trading this single dude is the problem. Like this man is not about to go cause commotion. Yes. Cause more commotion in the United States. He cannot even cause a fraction of the commotion the United States causes on a regular basis with our money, with our hard-earned money, mind you. Exactly. Tech and Wonderlust. They are only taking that position because she is a lesbian and they are right-wing reactionary bigots. If you think about it, the NRA are the real merchants of death. Truthful. All right. Yep. The CIA is like, remember when you're a little kid and you play, well, you shouldn't have played it because it was scary, but you play Bloody Mary in the mirror? That's like the CIA. Just out here running amok, causing wild amounts of damage to people. And then they'll let 20 years go by and like, okay, release the report and let's own up to what we did. Same Miles. I was very surprised. I learned that a few years ago and I was surprised that Boeing sells arms. Crazy. Very crazy. Simone, not affordable warfare. I mean, the fact they put affordable in there, I'm like, this is very strange. It's very strange. They have a marketing team to market weaponry. Wow. Oh, yep. He's not immune. Tiana from Fab Social has a great video about his war crimes as well. Sad. Yes, completely agreed, Sharon. Cheney was definitely in charge in those days. Bush had no idea what was going on, clearly, and didn't care. Yep. It was, never forget all of the foolish things that Bush did. Just like, lost in the sauce at all times. The funniest part of the shoe video is that A, I wish the shoe had smacked him. But B, was when he dodged the shoe and then dodged it again, he's laughing. He thinks it's a joke. This man is the president, and he's like, oh, someone throwing shoes at me. I will give it to him, though. He had really fast reflexes. I would have got hit with the shoe. I definitely got hit with the shoe. All right. Exactly. Yes. Rest in power, Patrice, Mr. Lumumba. That was as a kid, that was the wildest thing to me that day in the news. I was like, this man shot somebody in the face. Like, that to me was like the wildest thing to hear as a kid. I was like, we're not going to say anything about this? Like, this is not a problem? Like, people are like, oh, he didn't see him. I'm like, they're shooting birds. Like, that's not how this works. Oh, this is definitely getting demonetized. That's okay. It was going to go on Patreon. This is a great point, Jamal. War Racket is a great starting point for how the U.S. always was on Demon Time. Exactly. Hi, Wandering Druid. All right, we're just going. It's like people wanted her to sit in a labor. Like, what's wrong? What's wrong with people? It's a rhetorical question. I know what's wrong with them, but all right. Tasha, have you ever read Economic Hitman? Very good read and tells about so many assassinations and ruining of poor countries thanks to the good old USA. Oh, let me write that down. Economic Hitman. I haven't read that one. Economic Hitman. Thank you. I'm going to put that on my list. Yep. Kiki. Yes, they were always recruiting in my high school. Shameless. Shameless. Kids. Getting kids to throw away their future, sign up just to knowingly disregard them when they come back. Exactly. And honestly, I've known people that have joined to even get the student loan waiver. You have to serve a certain amount of time, as if it's prison, certain amount of time before you're even allowed to go to school. It's not like you can just do your 4 years, have a great time, and then just go sign yourself over. It's trifling. Jennifer, Stephanie, what? Oh, yes, I meant to mention him. Paul Whelan. Stephanie, what is your opinion as to why Russia wouldn't include the former Marine in the trade with Brittney? I think they're just, to be honest, from like a political standpoint, they're using a human being as a poker chip, which is very sad. Is very sad. And I'm sure an actual like geopolitical analyst can add more words to that, but essentially. Thank you, Boo. Listen, people, it's more comfortable to think that there's one boogeyman. To be honest, it's more comfortable to be like, it's just this one person. This one person is awful versus being like the system that we all contribute to knowingly and unknowingly is causing the problem. Which there are various mechanisms for us to push back and all of that, which we've talked about. But starting with, I think it's problematic that my alma mater is sending kids to go work at Lockheed Martin. I think it's problematic that they don't tell those kids like, oh yeah, Lockheed Martin, helps do really cool engineering things and also has a whole missiles department. It's crazy. When I was in college, the big thing for the College of Engineering, and I think it was in partnership with Lockheed Martin, was revamping Space Mountain, the ride at Disney World. And like, of course, like that's super cool. It's Disney, for better or worse. People love Disney, all these things. But people are saying that in the headline, not like, oh, look at this missile. Missiles are meant to hit people. Trifling. All right. All right, y'all. Well, I appreciate y'all. So since we're doing, this is the end of it, we are going to do 12 days of streaming. We are going to go with scam, scandals, and streams 1. We can do some lawsuits in there. Like, that's totally fine. But we'll try and make it a little lighthearted. So if there are any specific, this one was very, this was not lighthearted. But, I want to talk about it. If there's anything you want to cover, let me know. Question for y'all. This is very random, but we were talking about it on Patreon because it popped up in a newsletter that I read. Are you familiar with the Liver King? Yes, I said the Liver King. It is very out there. It is very wild. It is very much giving scam and scandal. And it's kind of comical. So if y'all want to cover the Liver King and after you look it up and you're like, Stephanie, what is this? And the legalities around him finally admitting that he has been doping up this whole time, even though he is selling young men raw bull testicles and has allegedly made $100 million selling young men raw bull testicles. We could cover that because I think that one might be kind of comical for all the wrong reasons. But yes, so let me know if y'all want to cover that. Thank you, Boo. If you haven't already, go ahead and like and subscribe. We can cover that. I think that would just be interesting as to what can influencers say and what can influencers get away with without pushing the line of this is false advertising, Boo. This is a problem. Also, anybody over the age of 18 could tell that he was juicing. I could see how a 13-year-old little boy, like at home, is like, oh, I want to be big too. Like, oh God. Yes, you heard that correctly. You heard all this correctly. It's very wild. It's very wild. Y'all can let me know in the comments here. If y'all want to cover that. If there are any other interesting things I want to cover, and I'll try to look up some as well. In terms of scams, there have been some I put on the back burner that we can cover, but I think the Liver King one is just so out there and it's so fascinating. So that way y'all have it for background. Let me send y'all the video that did a deep dive and basically outed him. The expose is a very good expose. I highly recommend it. It's from More Plates, More Dates, which is an interesting little title for their YouTube channel. So here's the video. So watch the video or watch parts of it, and let me know if y'all want to cover that. It's very fascinating. It's very fascinating. All right. Yes. All right, y'all. He's all natural chicken and rice. Okay. Oh yes, I remember when that happened. And I think I think somebody asked us on Instagram too. I'll put Ami the Hellcat on our list too. I remember when that happened like a few months ago before we started segueing into the legalities and the issues that arise when people want to scam. That was such large amounts of money, which I was surprised by. The Ami the Hellcat cable piracy scam. Huge amounts of money. Wild. So we'll put him on the list. If there's anything else, let me know. I haven't, but I do really want to watch that movie. I really do want to watch that movie, so I need to watch it. All right. It's silly. I feel like it's something silly and something silly and light, which we don't often do silly and light. So when we can do silly and light, let's do silly and light. Oh, this is a great point, Candace. Yes, please cover that. I think health myths going viral in general would be amazing. Oh, okay. Maybe we'll broaden it out a little bit because there were a few of them. Like, what? What are you doing? All right. On that note, it's so early. It's 4:00. So I'll see y'all. It looks like this time works okay. So we'll keep it for the next 12-ish days. It's going to be like up to the 20th probably because I'm going to my cousin's wedding in Jamaica. Will be 3 p.m. We'll keep it to 3 p.m. so it's the same across. So yeah, all right. I will see y'all later, and let me know in the comments what y'all would like to discuss. All right, bye.